Welcome everyone, episode number 39, if I'm not wrong, of the Monthly Dev. So we have been doing this for a while, and today we will talk about Python. No, we'll talk about TypeScript, no worries. And we have here two great speakers. We will let them introduce themselves later, but first of all, sound check, and hi everyone in the chat. Sound check. Are you there? Hi everyone. Mate, hi everyone. Tell us where are you from, and we also have a poll. Like you can tell us what's your current expertise in TypeScript: expert, intermediate, beginner, or just no level. So these are the four possible options. Okay. So before we start, I would like to if you want just introduce yourself super shortly, and then we'll start. Today you have a bit more time. Usually we have the session and then a Q&A session, so feel free to drop any questions you want, and after the presentations we'll have a Q&A session. So tell us something about yourselves, and if you want you can also say something if you know daily dev or not, if you want. Yeah. Who would like to start? James.
Okay. Nick, I like your shirt, by the way. I didn't realize what it was until now.
Thank you.
What's going on, everyone? My name is James Q Quick, which I always sound really obnoxious using my middle initial, but it's very intentional for branding purposes because SEO for James Quick was taken by someone else. So I am James Q Quick. But I'll have an intro in a second, and we'll see how that goes. But basically, I do content creation full time. So I do YouTube. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, like probably both of us, all of us here do. I run a Discord, have a podcast, do a lot of things, and I just love to teach people about modern web development practices. And for reference on the TypeScript scale, I would say I'm intermediate. I'm hesitant ever. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at anything, to be quite honest. So I would say intermediate for myself. But anyway, good to see you all. If you have questions, especially for me, and comments during my talk, that makes it so much more fun. Like giving virtual talks is incredibly tough when there's no reactions at all. So if you laugh or you get upset, just put it in the chat, so at least I know you're listening and hanging out with me.
Nice. Thank you so much, James. Nick, what about you?
Hoi, I'm Nick, Nick Nisi, for my branding purposes. And I am a software developer. I've been on the JS Party podcast for 6 years now. And I would probably, I hate to say expert because I don't feel like an expert, but I have been using TypeScript since 2013, and it only came out in 2012. And I emceed TypeScript Conf US for 4 years. So I feel like I'm close to expert, but I don't want to say expert yet.
So any actual experts out there, send in your TypeScript questions right now.
Yes. I mean, I am a Docker captain, and I still can't define myself as an expert in Docker. I've been using this for like 10 years. I don't know. But that's it. You are an expert, probably, is Nick, for sure. Nice. Thank you so much. So we have more than 200 people here. Be sure to drop in the chat. Hey, Nick. Yeah, before we start, I would like to ask you if you know daily dev. I know that at least one of you know it, but if you have some honest thoughts, no worries. I don't bite. We're even remote, so just if you want to share some honest thoughts, we have no script here.
I forgot about that part. I apologize. This is fully honest. Daily Dev is awesome. I've been a big fan early on. I mean, it's been several years now. I spend a lot of time consuming a lot of different content. I watch less YouTube videos than I used to, but I still watch a good amount of YouTube videos. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a bunch of articles. It's just kind of like what I do on a daily, pun intended, basis to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry. As we know, everything moves so quickly, and I just like to see what other people are doing, what other people are building, what tips and tricks are out there that I didn't know about, and to have a way for that to just kind of pop up for me, not have to think about going to search for stuff, and then to be able to have that curated based on tags and all sorts of stuff. There's even a bunch of features that I don't take advantage of that are also super cool that I just haven't gone that deep into. Anyway, daily.dev is an easy, convenient, awesome way to stay up to date with daily news and articles and things that are going on in the tech world, and highly recommended on my side.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, as for me, being completely honest, I haven't used it that much. But looking at it, it is exactly it looks like it would fill the gap that Twitter seems to be leaving me in terms of like finding relevant content that I would enjoy. So yes, I'm going to be using it now, and that's honest, completely honest. I will be.
I love this honest feedback. To be honest, I'm also a huge fan of Twitter. I think you can everybody can say this, but we don't know for how long this will be around. So and yes, so yes, of course, we also made a post on Twitter and so on. But yes, thank you so much, Nick. I will stay with James now and I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much. So I always say like we have a special guest, we have an important and great public speaker, but this time like I don't know how to say this. This is real, a person who I've been like connected for a while. James has been now it feels weird because James has been the first person who ever like talked about developer advocacy to me. So it was 2020, and like it was the first like explanation of developer advocacy. It was October or November 2020 when I was doing podcast on my YouTube channel, and now we are here. Like I here as a host again. James is super talented. I will not let everyone else saying something different. Hard worker, exceptional public speaker. I want to put pressure on you, James. James, I know that I can't, but I'll try anyway, just for having fun. James, if you want to say something before we start your presentation, I'm super happy and thank you so much, of course, for accepting here. And yes, so what will we talk about today? And probably I also forgot many things, but please say something what I missed, and then we'll start.
Yeah. I think you had it. I'll do a slide and talk a little bit about more details in a minute. But I want to talk about one of my favorite frameworks, which is Astro. And this is, so you kind of reached out, you and Tracy, about kind of doing some TypeScript. So I will have some TypeScript in here. I'm kind of building up to like why Astro is so amazing and getting to how TypeScript is a big part of that. But a lot of this is just my journey with Astro as a whole and why I love it so much and why I think it is a direct competitor to things like Next.js, which I think is a bold statement considering that it is still relatively new. And anyway, so it's just something I'm really excited about. I'm going to share a little bit about my my journey to loving Astro, which I think I still have some quirks to figure out of how I present that in a fun way, but I think it should be fun. So like we said earlier, if you have questions, comments, things like that, make sure to put them in the chat. We will have Q&A time after, and then also I can react to comments while I'm talking, and I'll accept all the pressure that you put on me to do at least a decent job today. So we'll see. Cool. Slides will be up momentarily.
Yeah, no, sorry, James, but like one random tab started to replay the theme song. Yes, so let's start. Let's share your screen. And thank you so much. And that was a bold statement. So we love bold statements. So in the chat now, I want to see people also leave some comments on this. But thank you so much because we need these like strong opinions in tech just to have fun. We had made a space last week. It was like, what is the best programming language? And of course, it was a joke, but it was it was so funny. We have one more about the JavaScript frameworks next month. So if you're curious, you can also join there. So we'll keep fighting, but of course, just to have some fun. Thank you so much, James. And I will stick in the chat. So feel free to drop all the questions. And as James said, feel free to drop things in the comments. James is a super expert in live streaming and presentations. So he will take a look, but I'll stick around. Okay.
Cool.
Best of luck, James. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Francesco. Nick, you're already starting off with dad jokes here. React to comments, given the shout out to Next.js in comparison to Next.js. I like it. Very well done. Since there's a little bit of there's not a ton of TypeScript here, so I want to throw one thing out there which I am opinionated about. It might be a little controversial, and it is around a little bit separate, but just on the TypeScript thought, and I'd actually be really curious to get, Nick, your reaction to this and your opinion. I think that TypeScript enums are actually a good thing. So there's been some pushback on TypeScript enums. I don't know, how, show of hands, like how many people know what enums are, how many people use enums in TypeScript, or do you use a different approach where you can use an as const reference in TypeScript to really make something constant and then reference that for like individual values. Nick against enums. And this is the thing. Here's the thing. I'm opinionated about, like, from what I've seen other people saying they don't like about enums or why they're dangerous and why they prefer another approach. I actually really disagree with the other approach and the benefits of that. But I don't care what you do, if that makes sense. Like, I have my opinion, but it's not one that I'm going to tell other people that they're wrong. So I'd actually love to hear more people's opinions on that. And Nick, we can duke it out later. So Michael is asking, what's the opposite, or what's the opposite of enums or the other options? So you can define a POJO, which is a plain old JavaScript object, and then you can reference that as constant TypeScript, and that means that thing absolutely cannot be changed. And then you can write a couple lines of TypeScript wizardry to get TypeScript IntelliSense around those values, and then reference the thing that way. And I have a whole video on this. If you're actually curious about this, you can go watch it on my channel to kind of dive deep into the opposing points, the opposing option, and why I think TypeScript enums make more sense for me. So that's my personal opinion. Just putting it out there for a little bit of conversation starter. I got Nick to bite, so we'll have a big fight on that later on. But today is about my love for Astro, and this the original kind of title for this is basically just like a love journey, my journey to loving Astro. So anyway, we've done a little bit of intro in general. I consider myself to be three things. I am a developer, a speaker, and a teacher, and I've done some combination of those three things professionally for over 10 years now, which is really, really hard to believe. And I've spent the majority of my career in developer relations or developer advocate or technical evangelist or whatever you want to call it. That's where Francesco learned about it for the first time, which is always really cool for me to hear. When I started as a technical evangelist, it was a brand, like it was a really new thing. It wasn't a very common thing, as common as you see developer advocates today. So anyway, the majority of my career has evolved around some sort of teaching, whether it's giving talks, whether it's giving workshops, whether it's creating content. So the thing that I stand by, my motto for myself, is I teach and inspire developers around the world. And this is another platform for me to do that and to talk about what is one of my very favorite frameworks, which is Astro. And Astro is only really a few years old, and we're going to kind of talk about the evolution of this, and we'll talk about why I'm so excited, etc. But first, I kind of polled on Twitter just to see what other people loved about Astro, and the responses are kind of all over the board in a good way, because there's so many good things to love about Astro. Ciora loves the documentation. Polly Wren had talked about excellent markdown support, which is absolutely true. Dan Spratling said it's so simple yet so powerful. I think that's a big trend with Astro, is the simplicity, but also the functionality and capability being there as well. And then this one is really, really interesting to me. And it's kind of funny. Kenneth, who I follow and interact with on Twitter a good amount, said Astro is pretty awesome, really. But the next part of this says, I haven't had time yet to check it out. Like I want to, but it's next on the list. And then he kind of commented like, I'm summoning framework trolls, which, hey, you could use that in your next Twitter space. But this one is particularly interesting to me because this is someone making a statement that Astro is amazing, but still not having yet had the experience hands-on with the framework, but it is in that backlog. And I'll talk a little bit, this is going to have kind of a correlation to kind of a dating and falling in love journey and story. And I'll talk about kind of my initial reaction to Astro and then how that progressed from there. And I think a big part of why we have this initial reaction to think it's amazing is because so many people have so many positive pieces of feedback on a framework, regardless of if they've used it or not. So a friend of mine in Discord, Christoph, mentioned documentation and community and simplicity and growth and features. And Jamie in here talks about how React felt foreign and how Astro felt simple. And it was kind of back to the basics and all of those kind of things. And I think what's most interesting about this is these are all examples where users have now become the advocates. And we started this, or Francesco did, by introducing the idea of a developer advocate, somebody that goes out in the community and they teach about the product that they work for. They advocate for the product that they work for. We take feedback. We help people build things using our products. And really, this is the dream when your users become your advocates, because we're always a little skeptical. If I have a product and I go out and tell you that it's awesome, you should be a little skeptical because I'm biased, right? Like if I'm a developer advocate for a company and I tell you, oh, this is the thing you ought to use for these reasons, you should be a little skeptical of that because I'm biased. But if someone from the community who has no stake in the conversation, they don't have any reason to tell you, they don't get any benefit out of it, tells you this thing is amazing, that's when you start to pay attention. And this is really where the dream in developer advocacy comes from. And the thing that we have to start with when we think about those scenarios of how people interact with our products, how people interact with developer evangelists, technical evangelists, developer advocates, whatever you want to call them, is the first impression. And I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we kind of introduced the idea that I definitively think that Astro is a competitor to Next.js. And there's some intricate details that we could get into. But Astro kind of came on the scene and pretty quickly had a lot of eyes on it. And it really reminded me of this meme where we have people that have loved Next.js, me being one of those people. And for what it's worth, I still love Next.js, and I would continue to love building with Next.js just as I would continue to love building with Astro. And they have some intricate details that make some differences there. But I saw Astro for the first time. I saw other people talking about Astro for the first time, and other people saw Astro for the first time or saw other people talking about Astro for the first time. And I think they had this initial reaction. And to be fair, in the JavaScript ecosystem, this is with almost every framework, right? Like we're always looking for something new. We're always looking for the next thing, etc. But I think there was something really real about my and other people's reaction when Astro started to get some notoriety. And the thing that's really, really important about this first impression is you only have a couple of seconds to make that first impression. And you know this, when we meet people, right? Like you have a good idea of, is this someone I can spend time with? Is this someone that's annoying? Are they a know-it-all? Do I have a lot to learn from them? Like we kind of get that inclination very quickly after meeting someone, just within a few seconds. And so what it feels like in the JavaScript ecosystem is we're just dating. And we're just on Tinder and we're swiping left, we're swiping right, we're trying to find the next thing. But that cycle seems like it never ends. We're just in this infinite dating loop of we want to explore, we want to try the next thing, and we get really excited. And so for me, my first exposure to Astro was through Twitter. It's somewhere I spent a lot of time. It's somewhere other people spent a lot of time as well. And I kept seeing, this is actually a more recent tweet, but it's basically symptomatic of what I was seeing at the time. I kept seeing things like this. The onboarding is adorable or amazing, or basically getting down to that first impression, just really nailing that first experience. And I remember for me, it reminded me very much so of when Gatsby first came out. And how many people in the chat, let me know if you used Gatsby before for your static sites. But I was seeing everyone 4 years ago convert from whatever they had to a Gatsby site. And I saw that so much where I was like, okay, I need to be doing this in Gatsby. I have to go and make that conversion. And it was similar on Twitter in the last 2 years where I saw Astro comment after Astro comment. And that really got my attention. And it led me to, I have to go and actually spend some time with this. And that is the power of social media. We talked about when users become your advocate from a company or product perspective. And the power of social media behind that is actually really immense. It has a huge impact on what we decide to do and what we decide to try. So I've kind of got this first impression in my head of Astro. People are talking about it. I'm interested, and I decide it's time to go on a date. I want to try this thing. And at the time, I was going through migrating from Gatsby, my personal site, and I was going to move to Next.js. And I was really having a lot of issue. I was having to do a lot of manual work to read files, to parse Markdown, to install packages, to do all these things. I was really struggling, and I was like, well, people are talking about Astro. I've already spent like hours and hours working on this migration in Next.js, but people are talking about Astro. I wonder what that's like. And the thing I want to stress is that the first date really says it all. The first, again, first impressions within the first couple of seconds. But if you go on dates, the first date says so much. You have a good idea of whether or not there's going to be a second date. You have a good idea if you need to call your friend to have them bail you out early, right? Like you get that feeling pretty quickly on that first date. And so when we translate from the dating world back into like the product world, that onboarding experience, the first experience that people have hands-on with your product, it has to be top-notch. It has to be flawless. It has to be basically absolutely perfect. And another way to think about this, in the famous words of Eminem, is you only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You only get that first impression, that first hands-on experience once. And that thing has to be absolutely top-notch. And I think that's what Astro was for me. So then the question is, like, for a product, and this is where I think people make a lot of mistakes, is if you had that first successful impression or interaction onboarding for a user, where do they go now? And I think the problem that a lot of frameworks make is they try to do too much too early. And they kind of get away from who they are and what they do and what they're real focused on and what the thing is that they do best. And they get away from that because they're trying to be everything to everyone. And Next.js is an example and a good way of that. They do so much for so many different people. But Astro started out with a very kind of niche area that they were focused on. And I think the learning for this, especially when you start out for any product, is just be you. Find the thing that you do well and do that thing really, really freaking well to make sure that that first impression is intriguing. It's amazing. You want to know more. Make sure that that first onboarding experience is flawless, that people don't have issues, that people can make it through the demo and make it to the curiosity for the next steps. And I think Astro is one of the best examples of that. And if you look at the tagline, this is a little bit different now than what it was a few years ago. Now they talk about being a web framework, and they talk about in here fast sites, client-side web apps, dynamic APIs, everything in between. They talk about a lot of different things, but what they did to start was they absolutely nailed the static first experience. If you were building a static content-driven site, Astro gave you the best experience that you could ask for. And from my perspective, I jumped a little bit ahead. This is the best static first experience I've ever been a part of. Gatsby was really nice. It had some onboarding that with GraphQL and things that I had to learn. By the time I got to Astro and I looked at building my site, converting my site to Astro, it was pretty much perfect at the time. That experience they nailed. Working with Markdown, querying and displaying data, creating static pages, all these things were just absolutely nailed. And I want to get to, I'll bring this full circle into TypeScript here in a second. That is the key driver to Astro for me being what it is. Getting to TypeScript in a second. This has got some tie in here to why this is such a big deal for me. But first on the Markdown experience. So Astro treats Markdown as a first-class citizen. To the point where Astro building a Markdown file in your source directory, in your pages directory, is automatically hosted as a page. So you can have front matter, you can have all the Markdown that you want, and that automatically gets hosted for you. And I think it's pretty powerful because of the configuration that takes in other frameworks, something like Next.js. And you can have nested pages, you can have a bunch of Markdown files, etc. And then here's where we start to get into the TypeScript, which you won't quite see just yet, but there is a hint in here that you should keep an eye out for. When we're querying and displaying data, this is where Astro takes it to the next level. And so we can walk through a little code snippet here where we have Astro content collections, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into this. But we have this get collection function that comes from Astro, and we can tell it what type of content we want. So in terms of querying our content, this is all we have to do to get all of our posts. We can then slice that to get the first 6 articles for a homepage or something like that. Then we can import a layout and a post list component and pass those posts in there. And then we have our blog listing page, and that's ready to go. Then if we wanted to create dynamic routes, we can do that too. We have a get static paths function, which is similar to Next.js. We also have this get collections function that we reference again to be able to call in the data. And then we can use that to be able to display it on our page as well. Now, there's one thing in here that is really key that we're going to come back to in a second, but I want to reiterate that this is the best static first experience that I've ever seen and used. And so at this point, when I kind of go through this onboarding, I'm looking at Astro and I'm looking at this being something quite honestly that I'm falling in love with. And there's a key that we've already seen here that gets really important, is that with our content collections in Astro, we get to reference a specific type of content that we want to query. And the question is, where does that come from? What does it mean? Where does that data come from? And this is where TypeScript gets involved in Astro and really takes the developer experience for building content-driven sites to a whole nother level. And that is the ability to define a config file, config.ts, inside of your Astro project. And inside of here, you can reference Z, which is for Zod. Underneath the hood, it uses Zod. And then we have our defined collection. And we can use this to define TypeScript types for every piece of content that we may want. And in my website, I have posts and I have talks and I have courses that I built, other things. I've got several different types of content that I can reference. But in this case, you can see I've got basic key properties with types in here for a post collection. And then to reference this or to actually use this, we can just export our post collection. And this is all that enables us to reference inside of here our post collection. And if we were to hover on the props for posts, we would actually see the TypeScript type for that, which is pretty amazing. So question in the chat from Michael, what is Z? Z is for Zod. And you probably have seen more of Zod recently. I've been seeing Zod pop up a lot more recently as well. And I'm using this in a few different ways. It's becoming more and more popular. My first experience with Zod was actually with defining content collections in Astro. So from there, for me, I was basically ready to get married to Astro. I knew that this was a framework that I wanted to use for a long time, that I wanted to commit to. And again, this is not something that negates Next.js. I still love Next.js. I still use Next.js, but Astro is one that I knew I wanted to use for a long time. And when I think about marriage, like being a little more literal, this is my wife and I a few years ago in London. I think about how marriage is all about constantly evolving. And so for us, in the last year, we had our daughter, who is now 10 months old, coming up on a year in May. And I think about how much our lives have changed, how a lot of things have stayed the same. We're still ourselves. We now have these additional responsibilities. We have a human in the world that we have to take care of. Yes, almost a year already, which is, it's really wild. But I just think about how we've evolved since having our daughter 10 months ago at this point. And I think that's true for any marriage. In any marriage, you go through these steps. You have different pieces of your relationship that change. You have kids, you have moved, you have new jobs, you have all these things. And you're constantly evolving. You have to do that together. And for better, for worse, sometimes for worse, for me, Astro has evolved really quickly. And I say this as a potential downside because I created a course on Astro. And when I was getting ready to release it, they released a new version of Astro. And then a few months later, they released another new version of Astro. So it's been a challenge for me as a content creator with this. Classic, yes. But back in January of last year, they announced Astro 2.0. And this actually included content collections, which is, I think, the best feature of any framework I've ever seen. I would love, maybe if there's like, if you have favorite features of frameworks that you've used, I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is easily the best feature in any framework that I've ever seen. So there's lots of stuff that came in that, but that was January 24th of 23. Then in August, when I was getting ready to release my course, they released Astro 3.0. And then a few months ago, December 5th in 23, they released Astro 4.0. And there's lots of really cool stuff in here. And for better or worse, Astro is moving really, really quickly, which means our relationship is constantly evolving. And I think the one that is most relevant today is Astro DB, which just got announced a few a few days ago, last week, a couple weeks ago. Can't remember exactly when it was. And this was Astro looking at themselves as a content-driven website, and I think getting some influence from something like WordPress, where they had the database co-located with their content, right? Like they actually had a database, not just markdown files that they could reference and save content in. And Astro is allowing you to do that as well. And this leads us into, I think, kind of the TypeScript generation of database engagements. Yeah, Astro 5 will probably be released before I finish talking. So I personally don't want to have any database reaction or database interactions without a TypeScript SDK sitting in front of it. I'm not a SQL person. I don't want to write SQL myself. I want to have an SDK that I can reference strong types in TypeScript to be able to interact with that database. And that's across the board. That's not just here. But AstroDB is really neat because it gives you the ability to run a local database really quick, really easy. They do all of it for you. So it's just kind of set up and ready to go. And they come pre-configured with Drizzle, which gives you that ORM to be able to interact with your database with TypeScript types, etc. And I think this is the future. It already is kind of the establishment of how we interact with databases, especially for myself. But you continue to see this become more and more common as people look for database interactions and including databases in their frameworks or in their tools or whatever it is. And this is a top-notch experience. It's something I'm looking to do more hands-on. It's brand new, like I said, a week or two ago. But it's really cool to see Astro go through this evolution of adding a bunch of different updates. And there's a question in here of, don't see the point of constantly changing to newer versions. Why in this? Why? I can't answer that explicitly. I don't exactly know. I think the good thing about this is the migration path between frameworks has been very easy. So they have like an Astro update command that you can do, and most of the stuff is fairly small, like in terms of breaking changes. But when they introduce any breaking changes, then comes a new version, new major version that they have to include. So I think that's the main piece of it, but it does move really quickly. Absolutely. And that's a little tough at times. So my two thoughts on Astro, again, this is not a super TypeScript heavy one, but the two things that I think, or the one particular thing that makes Astro explicitly different than other frameworks is content collections and the ability to have TypeScript types for those content collections, which is something that is missing across the board in other frameworks. And then you see Astro continuing to make TypeScript a first-class citizen as they do things like adding a database and a hosted database and Astro Studio and all these things. It still comes back to fully typed interactions in all of your code that you will write. Nick says version number helps to know whether the release is fixing bugs, features, breaking changes. Exactly. Yeah. And I guess there's a debate of like, could you save these breaking changes a little bit longer to do new versions every 6 months versus a couple months, or like whatever. The timing is the timing. But yes, that's exactly right. So for people that are curious about Astro, a couple of shout outs that I think are worth noting. There's a course from Chris Pennington that you can find at learnastro.dev. So that is an awesome course that came out a similar time to mine, not in the last few months, which is pretty cool. There's also the astroweekly.dev. This is a weekly newsletter about Astro that has content from other creators. It has the most recent updates about Astro, etc., which is pretty neat. And then I also have a course called Astro at astrocourse.dev, and I have a coupon if people are interested about this for daily.dev 25 for 25% off if people are interested. And this does get into content collections, full types, etc., and then maybe some updates with AstroDB going forward as well. So, clickers, there we go. So I do a few different things. I have a podcast called Compressed FM. I run a Discord called Learn, Build, Teach. I'm on Twitter. I'm on YouTube, doing a lot of different things. And I teach and inspire developers around the world. So thank you all for hanging out, listening. Michael, comment how TypeScript raises the bar for Astro developer experience. This feels like an Astro sales pitch. Well, sales pitch, I think, would imply that I get anything out of it. I think that's a fair call out. It is a talk that originally was strictly like my love for Astro, but I think the things that influence that are the specific features and specifically content collections that take that experience to the next level because of the TypeScript integration. So I don't get any benefit if you use Astro. Doesn't make any difference to me. It's just the thing that I love, and trying to tie that into the TypeScript thing is what I did. So
I hope you're done, James. I'm disturbing you.
Yeah, you're
Is
good.
this the last slide?
Yep.
Okay, nice. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, James. This was a great presentation. I loved the memes. I loved the storytelling. I love how you are getting me more and more curious about Astro, because I never used it. So I'm really curious about that. And yes, so I think, can you mute your microphone? I think I don't know if it's me. Okay, now. Okay, now I don't hear echo. Sorry, I was hearing a noisy echo. So if you have any question, just drop them. I think, James, you made an amazing job because you already answered all of them during the presentation. And yes, no, I think, and I would like to talk maybe 1 minute about this versioning thing. So I don't think it's a marketing thing. Like I think they're using the samware, the versioning. So more major releases, it means that more breaking changes. This can be both a good and a bad thing. So what do you think? Is this like a bad thing or a good thing?
Well, I think the speed at which they update is that's tough, especially as a course creator, right? Because I was getting ready to release, and then came out with a new version, and then a couple months later they had another new one. So after already trying to upgrade for version 3, then I had version 4 a few months later, and I think that's tough. I think we see things like Angular, I think, is twice a year, so I think they get a new major version of Angular every year. I don't know like I don't think there's a specific cadence with Next.js. It's probably about 1 a year or something. Not exactly sure. So yes, anything that is breaking changes obviously should be a major version change. Those are required. It's understandable. I think you could debate about like, does it make sense to do it as quickly as they do? On one hand, it's amazing to have these new features and to see these improvements coming out. On the other hand, it's a little hard to keep up. So it's kind of a balance there.
Yes, we have one question about lights, but I can see the lights. I don't know what to take. Like, so you are talking about. I don't know if it's referring to me or
yeah,
not.
he's talking about mine. So I have new lights that I haven't actually used. Jason, they're here. I haven't gotten them set up. So this is my existing lights. I have the Elgato lights, but they disconnect all the time now. Like I don't know what happened to them, but they're a lot more inconvenient than they used to be. I'll put it that way.
Nice. So I have one last question for me. Then if we have one more in the, in the audience, we can take it. What do you think is the best use case for Astro? Because it can be, you know that any framework can be used for different things. Again, I never used it so far, but I attended like 2-3 talks about that. So usually I'm starting to get exposed by it. At some point, even this DevOps guy will check it out. So what do you think is the best use case to use Astro as a first choice?
Yeah. So their tagline, and I think the thing that makes the most sense, is content-driven website. So you think about blogs, you think about if I have a talks page where I list all the talks that I've given at conferences or things like that. That sort of stuff, I go back to like that's definitively the best experience that I've had. But they also have the ability to do full server backend stuff. You can do API endpoints, you can do form submissions, you can do all of those things. And so the reality is you can build basically any full stack thing that you want to. And that's where I think we're starting to see this comparison, or in my mind, competing with Next.js, because you have the ability to do all those things. Next.js has been doing those things for several years now. So obviously they have some niceties and some ecosystem things that are already figured out that Astro is a little bit behind on. But my bet is if you look at how Astro has progressed from nailing their core experience to then progressively adding additional features and functionality, I just, in my heart, know that as they continue to add features, the developer experience around that is going to be absolutely incredible. And so that's where I think there are times where I would still use Next.js now for a bigger, full functioning application. Not that you couldn't do it with Astro, but there's some niceties that come with Next.js. So I would still do that, but I think that gap is going to get smaller and smaller.
Nice, because I was planning to create something like this, like my content or my talk and my stuff. I don't know if there is integration for the search, something like Algolia. Do you know if it has something like this? Last question.
Well, I'll give. So you could include Algolia just like you would in any other framework. I say that like I'm fairly confident that's true. I haven't specifically done that myself. I also, full transparency, it's a paid partner of mine in Zeta that is really an amazing database that I enjoy working with, and they have search built into their database kind of framework. So they basically copy over behind the scenes your data to Algolia that gives you in their SDK access to search as well. And that was super easy for me to work with. And you could do that in any framework just using their JavaScript SDK.
Nice, thank you. We are about to close, and of course now we are dropping the questions. So we go on the fast pace replies. What do you think about Astro's island architecture support?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that we could talk about of reasons that I love Astro. The island architecture is one. So Astro by default doesn't ship any JavaScript to the browser. And if you pay attention to conversations around how we build web applications, best practices, send as little JavaScript to the browser as you can so it can load faster, blah, blah, blah. And you see all different frameworks trying to find ways to ship less JavaScript to the browser. And so Astro doesn't ship any by default. What it then enables you to do, though, is create these islands using other frameworks like React, Vue, Svelte being my favorite UI framework on its own. You can use these other frameworks to add little pieces of functionality in your site. So if you have a static blog post, but then you want to load in dynamically comments or number of reactions or something like that, you can create that component in your framework of choice, basically, and have that be an Astro island where it only pulls in JavaScript for that specific island. So the short answer is I love islands. I think it's really amazing. I think the flexibility to use other frameworks is really cool as well. And then you kind of just get like optimization in JavaScript, like in terms of how much JavaScript you send to the browser out of the box. And it's kind of up to you to break that and then intentionally break that in a way that you're still only sending what you need.
Thanks, James. Very last question. Aren't we supposed to stop using TypeScript?
Yeah, I definitively disagree with that. I use TypeScript for every project that I set up. Every framework now, and this is different than 2 years ago, has TypeScript as either default or a configuration option, like as you go through the wizard to create a new project. I absolutely think TypeScript is here to stay, and I don't think TypeScript is going away at all. There was a little bit of debate for framework maintainers or like open source maintainers of whether or not they got the value of TypeScript versus maybe just like JS docs. I don't fully know that debate, so I'm not going to speak about it. So there was some debate about when doing that in open source that then gets compiled to be used by someone else, does that give them the value that they were looking for? But I would say the vast majority of conversations that I hear from people are I use TypeScript, I understand the benefits of TypeScript, and I want the benefits that TypeScript gives me.
Thank you so much, James, also to reply to literally all the questions, all the comments. Yes, so I've been getting more and more exposed to Astro. At some point, I'll try it out. I might even do a live stream, of course, about it when I try this for the first time. So I'll have my really hot reaction, and of course, honest. Thank you, James. We will drop you talked about a link to a course. So if we can, we will drop it later. Said this. Be sure to follow James everywhere. We left some links below, of course. And James, see you around probably at Render ETL. Are you coming to Render ETL?
Yep, I'll be at Render.
So see you in 2 months, basically. Yep. Okay. Nice. Thank you so much, James. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay, let me invite on stage Nick. Nick, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for your patience, of course. And now it's your turn. You did a great job in the chat. So I see that you're already warmed up.
Oh yeah.
So please introduce yourself and tell me what is your talk about. A sort of spoiler while we warm up. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So, thanks for having me on again. And I'm Nick. I'm going to be talking about the TypeScript compiler. specifically unleashing the power of the TypeScript compiler in ways that are more than just writing TypeScript, but also very much just writing TypeScript. So just some fun things that are, in my mind, practical and a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah, I really can't wait for this. When you want, you can start sharing your screen, and as usual, we'll have like a 25-30 minutes presentation. Take your time, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And of course, be sure to drop your questions. Don't wait the very last minute, but just drop the questions. And usually we take the questions at the end. If you want to answer in the flow, feel free to do that, but usually the standard way to do that is at the end. So unleashing the TypeScript compiler. Give me like a 30-second speech, and then I'll let you start. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So this talk is on unleashing the TypeScript compiler, specifically querying, analyzing, and acting upon your code itself, as using your code as a data type. So I kind of mentioned this already, but I'm Nick Nisi, and I'm a panelist on JS Party, and I also organize Nebraska.js here in Omaha, where I live, and I'm a former MC of TypeScript Conf and Nebraska.js Conf. Both of those are no more, but their memories sure remain.
Nice. Thank you. Best of luck, Nick. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
All right. So what's TypeScript good for? We kind of been talking about this in the chat, and it's good for a lot. It's used everywhere. As I mentioned, I've been using it for over 10 years now, exclusively. I haven't written actual JavaScript in over 10 years, and I just don't see any way of going back, except for the possibility of the type annotations proposal. If that comes true, then JavaScript would just start looking more like TypeScript, and I would still be using the TypeScript features like the language server and things like that. So there's a lot to love about TypeScript. And the things that we love about it are things like the type safety, of course. It makes our code more readable. I put an asterisk there because some people will debate on that topic right there. If you're not familiar with the syntax, it does look a lot worse, especially when you start adding generics everywhere. It can be really hard, even today, for me to follow things if they have a lot of generics in there. It's scalable. It lets our code be scalable. Imagine trying to write a massive JavaScript application without type hints, without the ability to refactor, and without the IDE support that we have today. It would just be terrible. I just had flashbacks of 2013. Well, it also gives us tomorrow's JavaScript today. And what I mean by that is, for a long time, like after ES 2015, when that came out, there was a lot of changes to the language, and people were using 6.5, which became Babel, which is a really great project, but it like introduced this way to do plugins. So then you could write your own like custom syntax, or people would implement plugins for proposed features that never came to be. And then you end up with this like weird abomination that's not really JavaScript, but now your code's written in it. And so that's kind of dangerous. TypeScript is a way to do that, where it will kind of transpile some of the newer features coming to the language, but in a way where it will be future-proof going forward, because they won't actually support it in the language until it's at stage 3 in the TC39 proposal lifecycle. And so at that point, it's something that is here to stay. The syntax is probably not going to change. And it's something that you can safely start using today, while you wait for all of the browsers to implement it natively. But there's a lot more to TypeScript than just TypeScript. Specifically, if you went and looked at the TypeScript repo, there's a lot of different pieces in there. And when you take your code in, what we have here, our code, it gets passed to a lexer, which tokenizes it and sends it to a parser, which turns it into an abstract syntax tree, which passes it to a binder to get the symbols and does type checking on all of those symbols. And then it emits our transpiled code from the emitter into JavaScript or type definition files or source maps. And so there's a lot to it just in TSC, in the code that we do. And this is not even to say like the language server, the piece that your editor talks to, and other pieces of the TypeScript project itself. But there's a lot right here just within the compiler that we can play with. And specifically, we can kind of pick and choose and use a few of these where we can use the lexer and the parser to get an abstract syntax tree and then use the emitter to emit a changed version of our TypeScript code right back to the file itself. So we can rewrite the code in our own way using the compiler itself. And there's a lot of different terms for this. One is code mods, and that's probably the most popular term for it. But you can use other tools too to do this, but it's built right into the TypeScript compiler because it knows how to interpret TypeScript code, and we can take advantage of that to query and make changes to our code itself. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we can use TypeScript's own tools to create our own tools, or put in a more verbose way, using TypeScript to analyze TypeScript so we can rewrite our TypeScript. And why would we do this? Well, to strive to be lazy. That's something that I learned in my first year of college is programmers always strive to be lazy. We'll go out of our way to write a bunch of extra code so that we never have to write that code again. And code mods are a perfect example of that, where you can write code that writes the code for you so that you never have to write that code again, and you can just run the script to get that code out. So we're taking that to the next level, striving to be lazy. So an example that I want to talk about is a practical example from a previous job that I was on, where we had a large monorepo with a very legacy React app that was using Material UI, or MUI. And specifically, it was using Material UI 4. And we wanted to get rid of that. There are lots of reasons for it. This project is a legacy project. We're still using Material UI 4.x, which is deprecated. Material 5 is there. They're working on Material 6 right now. So it's time to say goodbye to that. We also kind of lost faith in the whole CSS and JS route, like defining in Material UI 4, they use JSS. So you define this JavaScript object with all of the CSS that you want. And then it gives you like these classes as a JavaScript object, and you can place those within your React code. They're going to something called Emotion, but we had kind of all, and specifically me, had started drinking the Kool-Aid of Tailwind. And so Emotion, JSS, any of those CSS and JS solutions, just, they don't look appealing anymore once you fully drink that Tailwind Kool-Aid. And also Material UI 4 kind of locked us into TypeScript 4.x and React 17. So it was really hard. We were kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of upgrading things, because Material UI specifically only supported TypeScript 4 and React 17, but we have other things that are now dropping support for those and want you to use React 18 or TypeScript 5.x. And so it just kind of left us in this place where it was impossible to make these changes that we wanted to make because the app was so big. There were, thousands of files with thousands of components, and telling the product team that, hey, we're just going to, take a step back for a year and go rewrite this whole thing. Doesn't really lead to a lot of agreement on that, because you're not actually shipping any new features, and it's hard to explain to the rest of the company, hey, sorry, we're rewriting this so that it'll be the exact same in a year. Doesn't work. So how do we justify that work? Well, we can use these tools within TypeScript to analyze our code, just to get an idea of what we actually want to do, what we're actually going to be getting ourselves into with this kind of work. And to do that, we can analyze the code base by basically creating a list of the files that are using these components, sort that list by the files that are using the most of those components, but also get a list of what components from Material UI are actually being used the most, and then print that out as a quick way to analyze, send that reporting up to, through the chain of command to start biting off that work or start planning this type of work. Just a way to get the conversation started. So to do that, we can use a tool called Glob to just grab all of the TypeScript files in our project. And we can specifically say we're going to ignore anything that's in node modules, anything that's built, anything that's in different files, like different folders, any test files or index files, like think of that as like barrel files that are just re-exporting things. Anything that starts with U, so we don't care about looking into hook files, and we don't care about storybook stories. We just want to see in production what code are we actually using that is using Material UI, and how is it being handled. And so we can do really simple things like keeping track of the number of files using a used number and just incrementing that every time we encounter a new one. And we can keep track of what components are being used in a map, where the key would be the file, the component name, and the value would be the number of times it's used. Same thing with projects. That would be the files. So the file name would be the string, and then the number of times that it's using a component internally would be the number. And so we can keep track of all of that. And then we could just take our files list that we got from that glob, and we can convert it into an abstract syntax tree. And so an abstract syntax tree is just a tree-like representation of our file itself. And it's just a single file at a time. So that's taking each file and looping through it, and then using the FS import to read the file and get that as the source. So we'll just get a string that contains the source of the file, and we can just pass that directly to TypeScript. We can say TypeScript.create source file, pass it in with the file name, and we'll get back an abstract syntax tree. And then with that AST, we can do things with it and now start looking at our file. And there's the main reason that we would want to do this and convert it to an AST is because we want to be able to look at the file as it's being interpreted by the compiler. We could do things like find and replace, but it might find things that are in comments or find things in other places that aren't actually like what we're looking for. So with the abstract syntax tree, we can specifically say, hey, we want to find every import declaration and look at what it's importing and specifically the names that it's using. And so then we're not looking at comments. We're not looking at anything that kind of looks like it or might match our regular expression. We are looking at the actual import declarations that are being used and then analyzing that. So to do this, we could just find all of the imports, like I said, the import declarations. And so TypeScript gives us this for each child that we can call, and this will just loop through each child in the top level of the file. So we'll pass in the abstract syntax tree to it, and then for each child, we'll get the node, whatever the node is that we're using, and we can just tell it, if it's not an import declaration, then don't do anything. So we'll just skip it. It'll just skip that turn. So we'll do that check here, and then we'll cast the import declaration. So that it's, there we go. I was trying to draw. So that it's set as an import declaration type, and then we can have the import path. So we'll get the actual path that it's being set to, and we want to specifically only look at things where the path is material-ui/core. So anything that we're loading in there, all of the other import declarations, we just won't even look at. So now that we've got that, then we can get the import clause from there. And this is going to be like the piece of it where it's the import and then like the curly braces of whatever we're importing from within there. And so we can get that. That would be the named binding. So what are they named? We'll get each one of those. We'll get the name of it. Here we're specifically going to ignore anything that ends in props. So we're just looking, we don't care about the types that we're bringing in, because if we get rid of material UI, we won't need those properties anymore. So we'll say goodbye to those, and we'll just set that into our components here. So we'll set it to the name that we're importing. This would be like grid or box or button or text field, those imports from material UI. And the number of times, we'll just increment that each time for what we're using. And then finally, we'll keep track of the file that's actually using that, and we'll say, oh, this file is using another React component from material UI. So we'll just increment that as well for the file name. So how did I know what to search for? This is a lot of code. There's a lot of weird things in here. Import declaration, .module, specifier, .get text. Like, it's a very verbose API. How did I quickly write all of this? Well, as the answer is, most of these days, ChatGPT. ChatGPT is actually really good at understanding ASTs and giving you feedback on how to properly identify things within your code using an AS tree syntax. So ChatGPT is really great for that. But that's only part of the picture, because it also does hallucinate quite a bit. So you always have to check it. And another really great tool is astexplorer.net. This allows you to paste your file, the contents of your file, on the left side, and it will give you the tree representation on the right. There was a screenshot here. I don't know why it's not loading. It'll show you that, and then you can click on like the piece of the file that you want to look at, and it'll highlight it in the tree, or vice versa. So you can quickly find your way around and see what things are named. And you can do that for all different types of AST. So the TypeScript compiler AST, ES-tree, Esprit, all of these different AST implementations. And so then once we have all of that information, we've looped through and found every import. We know that imports are only at the top level of each file, so we really only had to do that check once for each of the imports in each file. We didn't have to recursively look down the file in this case, so it makes it nice and easy. And we can just print out exactly what we saw here and where all of these files are used. So this is what it looks like when you output that. It'll say, here's the total I found per component exported by Material UI Core. We've used the box component 3 times, the grid component twice, a theme provider once, and SVG icon once. So we've used a total of 7 different components from Material UI, and 3 of them are in pro tip, 2 are in copyright, 1 is in main, and 1 is in app. And so it's used in 100% of our current files within this repo. So let's take a look at that and just kind of run it here just to show an example. And I've got this mapped to analyze. Yeah, so in this project, which is just a simple React app set up with Vite, it's got box being used. So it's saying that we'll go look at pro tip. Pro tip is using 3 different components here. So let's open up pro tip and take a look. Here, right here is SVG icon. So we can see that we're importing box, grid, SVG icon, and SVG icon props. You'll notice that it didn't mention props because we specifically filtered that out. So we're only seeing box, grid, and SVG icon, those 3 components that are used. And there's SVG icon. Here's box, grid, grid again, grid again, grid again, box, grid again. And so it's fully aware of all of the components that are being used in there, and we quickly found that out. So now we can take this report and show it to leadership or during as part of the planning process and say, okay, specifically here's all of the things, and it looks like we're using box the most, but also it looks like pro tip is the biggest consumer of that, and this is just a simple app. In the case of a real app, these numbers would be in the thousands for each of them. So it really gives you a better indication of what is being used where and how we can tackle this so that we know if we wanted to make a big impact, again, striving to be lazy, if we could do something to automate away all of our boxes, that would take care of the most of our problems. And then grids after that. Same thing. If we spent the most manual time in pro tip, we're going to get a lot of benefit out of that because that's one of the biggest consumers, and we can kind of go down the list from there and try and automate our way out of this. So yeah, in the real world app, this was closer to 9,000 components across 654 files. So certainly it's a major effort to drop Material UI in our case, and we would want to look for a way to actually justify this kind of work. And that's where we can say, or is it a lot of work? Because we can make these changes with the power of AST. So when we have the AST, we can query it like we just did, but we can also manipulate it. And we can re-emit the source files from the AST. Now, one important note that I wanted to make here is TypeScript doesn't really care about formatting when it outputs. If you think about like taking your TypeScript code and transpiling it to JavaScript, you probably never look at what the JavaScript actually looks like. It looks somewhat clean, but it may not follow the same patterns, tabs versus spaces, single quotes versus double quotes, etc., that you actually use in your project. And so that formatting can get lost in the process. But Prettier has an API, and we can just make sure that after we output, we can just call Prettier on that newly outputted file and reapply all of those formatting changes. So it becomes a non-issue if you're using an awesome tool like Prettier, which I highly suggest you do. So we probably can't handle every case, but like I said, if we could handle just the boxes, we're probably going to make a lot of that work easier, because then we don't have coworkers that have to do that, or we don't have to do that ourselves. We're striving to be lazy. We're letting the computers take our jobs in this case, and we love it. So that's where the next tool comes in that we can create, and that's called Convert. And I have it in the sample repo, which I'll have a link to at the end of these. And what we can do is we can just write a converter that knows how to handle our box components and knows how to handle our grid components. And it can just go through and magically convert those to Tailwind components so that we don't have to think about it and the work is done. Nice and easy. Now to do this, we can just use the vanilla TypeScript compiler API that comes with TypeScript. All you do is import TS from TypeScript. But then you have to go through the process that is kind of a little bit of a pain of making nodes. You can't just like write TypeScript and say, replace this node with this string. Because it's expecting you to give it a node to replace that other node with. And that's where something like tsmorph comes in. It's a helper library for working with the TypeScript compiler API. And it lets us quickly set up our project based on a TS config and then query for those nodes. And then we can take a string representation and replace that node with that string representation. And it will do the converting for us so that we don't have to do it ourselves. So major +1, continuing to strive to be lazy. That's the term you're going to get out of this for sure. So this is setting up the project. We would just import a project from tsmorph, and we would create a new project, and we can pass it the root to our TS config. And then if I had said not set skip adding files from TS config to true, it would just automatically know about every file in our project, and we wouldn't have to do anything else. However, I'm not doing that in this case, and that's only because I specifically want to tell it what files to look at so that I can explicitly control and say, I do not care about spec files or story files. Leave those out of it, and I will tell you everything else. So that's where I'm just using a glob to represent that instead. So let's create a converter class. Now, this is just a custom class in TypeScript that I wrote. It's an abstract class that accepts a component property pattern, and then it knows exactly how to take each prop off of that component and map it to a Tailwind class and then export that. And so this is what it looks like in there. It's a converter. And it's got a static create converter call that you can pass to it, which will allow you to set any base classes that you want for a box or for a grid, and then provide a lookup table. So whenever it finds, a item property or something called item or a align content property, it knows that it has to map that to these Tailwind classes. So that's what that is going to be. And then internally, it's just going to set up, call its constructor, and it's going to have a convert function that you can call, which will, you pass it in the property, or sorry, the React component. It will look at that, and it will convert it into a div with Tailwind classes on it instead. So let's take a look at the grid one, because that one's nice and easy. Easy being a relative term here, I suppose, but it's still pretty straightforward. Grid is basically just a flex box within MUI components. You have a grid and you give it a container or an item property as a Boolean property. And then it's going to set a container will contain items in it. And then it will align those either vertically or horizontally based on whether you have it, the alignment set to row or column, just like you would in Flexbox. And it will properly space those out, giving you the ability to set spacing between them, and also to just have things aligned properly. Basically, what you would use Flexbox for. Even though it's called Grid, you would think CSS Grid, but no, Flexbox. So this is what it would look like. Inside of our code, we've got this. This is in the copyright component. It's got a grid with a container, and spacing is set to 1. And then inside of there, we've got two items, grid item here with the anchor tag and a grid item with the year. And this is what we would want it to convert into. We would want it to be a flex with flex wrap set as well. And then gap would be 1. And that's because we set spacing to 1. So we're just saying, oh, we'll just set gap to 1. If we change this to 2, then this would be 2 as well. And that's the mapping that we're doing. Then in here, we have grid item. So an item would just have flex auto and box border being set. Same thing with this one, flex auto and box border, because it's mapping the item to those classes. Whoops. So the steps to do that. First off, let's run the code real quick just to show kind of what that looks like. It's a very simple site with TypeScript tips, a pro tip, and a copyright down here. I basically took the Material UI 4 example and modified it slightly, but it's still very vanilla in what it's doing. Okay, So the steps that we're going to follow to convert this is we're going to convert the element into a list of properties. So we'll have a grid, and then it'll have a list of any properties that it has on there as well. We'll convert each one of those properties into a class string or a complex class value. If you think back to the code and the copyright here, the container would probably be a simple string conversion. Same thing with item, but spacing, we need to set it to 1, and that will actually also be a pretty simple value. But let's say that we had another property in here called spacing. Let's say that we did some kind of check here, is mobile, and then we would say 1 or 3 or something like that. So we'd have a wider spacing when we're not on mobile. This would be a more complex class where we would need to change this in and account for that. We can't just wrap what they gave us in a string and call it good. We have to actually keep the ternary and replace it in a specific way. And so that's what that's doing with the complex class values. Then we get a list of additional properties that we're not accounting for. And then we construct the new div and add a class name to it, and then add those remaining properties back. So this would be things like the additional props, data, test ID, key. These are properties that we want to keep. We don't want to lose those when we do this conversion. We want to move them over and put them on the new div that we create. And so this is what the converter looks like for the grid. This is the whole thing, minus the calculate width here. I'll kind of show that when we go to some code. But the grid converter, we're just giving it in. We're saying that a grid won't have any base classes. It'll just always have, whatever it needs will be defined by the properties that it has. And then anytime a line content is set, we'll just put a content property on our Tailwind class. So same thing with items. Line items, we'll set that to items. So that could be like a line item center equals center. This would just be items dash center. The container would always convert to flex with flex wrap. So we're adding 2 classes for that one. And then the direction, specifically direction is column. So if we set direction to column in Material UI, it's actually call in Tailwind. So we would have to just do a switch to call instead. So it'd be row flex dash row or flex dash call for that. And then, we're doing some special magic here to convert the different breakpoints that we might set. So large, medium, small, extra large, or extra small, and just doing some special calculations. But that function is just returning a string. And so this is not a complete list of all of the properties, by the way, that grid supports. But using the power of analysis from the previous example, I just went through the entire project and I made a list of every property that is passed to a grid in the entire project. So I know that these are the only ones that we are using that's custom to our team. So I don't have to worry about anything else. I'm striving to be lazy and not accounting for 100% use cases, just 100% of our use cases. And this is what it looks like when we run it. You run it, it goes through every file, finds those, makes those replacements, saves the files out, and then we can go look at a diff and see, okay, yeah, that looks correct. It looks like it's changing this box to that has a margin of 4 to have a class name of M4. That makes sense. And we can just do this comparison really quickly. And then we can run the analyzer again and see that we now have fewer classes. Now in 50% of our files rather than 100%. So we have just improved things by 50% in this simple app, which is awesome. And let's actually run it to give us an indication of what it's doing. Okay, so we'll just do convert. And -O just means organize imports. I did do like a whole help here. So the organize imports, that will call a TypeScript helper that TypeScript has itself that will go through, and if we're not importing Material UI things if we're not using Material UI things anymore, it will delete them. So we can get rid of those. We can also run a dry run just to not actually make changes, but print out what would happen if we let it actually write out the files. So that's a good way to just check it. So we'll just say convert -O on it. and it converted 13 elements across 4 different files for each of those boxes and grids. And now if I do a get diff, we can see that it deleted the box that we have, and it replaced the boxes with divs in this component. In this one, it deleted box and grid and replaced those with divs with the proper CSS names on them. And we have the file running here. Oh, no, we don't. I killed it. When we have the file running here again, not that it looked great before, but it looks pretty much the same as it did before. There's a few quirks, specifically the spacing here we need to fix. So that is something that we can go back and fix. But for the most part, it is pretty complete. And we just cut 50% of our work. So that's great. Well, how did that actually happen? Well, this is what the convert file function looks like in there. It's getting a list of the attributes, and it's setting a class string that it's going to be building here. And then it's just going to run an initializer, run a transform based on the different types that we have. So the initializer would be like the value of the property. So if we had spacing equals 2, the initializer would be the node that represents the 2, the value that we're passing to spacing. If we don't have a value, that's because it's a Boolean prop like container or item. So we'll just pass undefined to it. And I'm just explicitly calling that out. But otherwise, if we're just passing a string to it, then we'll run that and we'll just get back, we'll get the literal value of the string. Otherwise, if it's a JSX expression, then we're going to get that expression and we have to check, is it an object literal expression? So that way it would be wrapped in 2 curly braces. Or is it a conditional expression, in which case that would be like a ternary. We would have to account for a ternary. And that would also make it a complex class. So we wouldn't just be able to output a string. We would have to wrap it in curly braces and then have some way of accounting for that in there, which we do handle. And otherwise, it's just a basic one, and we just grab the text that's in there and pass that out. And then finally, we just return the class. And so for each of these, there's a lot of different code that's running, and I'll show some code examples here after this. But I just wanted to call out the fact that this code can be a little bit dense, and that's just the way it is with abstract syntax trees. There's a lot to it because you're tokenizing every piece of a file and then working with those at a node level. So it can be just a little bit dense. So looking at that in the editor, this is what it looks like in the scripts, the converters, the converter file. We just looked at the convert function. It's got a bunch of helpers with it, but the main one that it's calling is it's creating a list of props, and then it's going to pass those it's going to loop through those. And the prop is the one that is actually handling that through the mapping that we created. So when we say spacing maps to gap in the case of the grid, that we would have a prop called spacing, and it would know that it outputs a grid dash whatever. And so it knows how to handle conditional expressions, ternaries. It would handle that properly. And then here is the transform that it's running. So if we pass in a transform function, again, this is in the grid converter. For example, this is a transform function, direction. It'll call that and pass in the name and the value. And otherwise, it'll just return the transform if there is no value. So in this case of like an item or a container where it's just a Boolean value, we'll just return the transform. Otherwise, we will do a transformation where we get the transformed value. In this case, that would be gap, and then whether it's an arbitrary value or not, and we can wrap that in square brackets. This would be like if you had like a hard-coded hex value that you wanted to preserve when it does the transformation. It would do that and just wrap it in here for that special Tailwind syntax to allow you to use that custom value. And then, yep, there's the convert function. So this allows us to work with our code as our data and make these changes. And yes, it is kind of time consuming, especially as you're learning and coming up to speed with this. Like there's a lot that you have to learn about handling different conditions, handling all of the different scenarios, but you can really tailor it to your products or the way that your code is developed, so that you handle that in just the way that you need to, and no more than that. So it makes it a little bit easier. And if you actually get it working, like in this case, in the actual app that I was running this in, it did successfully change, I think it was 4,000 components into Tailwind classes, or Tailwind divs with Tailwind classes, across 600 something files. So it basically cut the work in half by me spending a week or two learning this. So one dev doing it cut the work in half, and that makes it much more approachable for us to justify this refactor to the business. So some takeaways from this: TypeScript can be used to query and change TypeScript itself. It's a very vast API, but a very small team can have a massive change, and they can strive to be lazy the entire time. And these code mods are reusable. So one thing that I did was, I didn't just like write this, convert 4,000 components, and then submit a pull request. That was, the biggest pull request you've ever seen. I just checked in the code mod, and then that allowed teams to run them on their own, so that if they were working in a specific area of the project, they could run this, make all of those changes automatically, and then just include it as part of their pull request. So it's biting off smaller chunks at a time, because it's completely reusable and reworkable as you go. If it ever conflicts with code, you can just back it out, revert the change, and then rerun it again on the new change after you've resolved the conflicts, and you're good. So makes it really nice to be able to reuse it. Some cool projects that are in this space. Again, TS Morph. JS CodeShift is another project around this, where you're not using the TypeScript compiler API, but using one that works with JavaScript as well. And there's a lot of code that's written around JS CodeShift as well. The reason I looked into the TypeScript API is, I wanted to learn more about the TypeScript API, and I didn't like the API that JS CodeShift had, like the chaining API that it had. Maybe it's changed in the last few years, but that's definitely worth checking out as well. If for nothing else than just to get inspiration. And then AST grep is a new tool that is really cool. It's kind of like a ACK or a rip grep, or just a grep that you can run on the command line, but you can specifically target AST nodes through that, and you can do quick find and replace all from the command line, which is really cool. I don't think it's using the TypeScript API for that again, but just a really cool tool that you can integrate into your daily life to make these changes quickly and on the fly. And then, of course, there's a using the TypeScript compiler API wiki page on the TypeScript repo that you can take a look at to get started as well. So thanks. The project is here at TS Compiler API Talk on GitHub, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Nick. It was a very insightful presentation. Now I'm I can't say that I'm happy that we had no show, because one of the speakers had an issue, but I'm happy that you had your time to share everything. And also I liked also how the talk was structured. It was very technical and very, very nice. I have some questions, but I let the people to go first. Or in the meanwhile, I can ask you something. So one of my questions, like that I got prepared, it was is there any project but you anticipated this by showcasing this with exactly with the previous slide? So my next question is is there any other cool project, or what? Like you mentioned some of them, but if you can elaborate more, especially maybe, I don't know, some use cases, how can we use it? Because it sounds super cool for me, but then how can we play around with that? That's my main question, because maybe I will create some content out of it. So it's also a personal question.
Yeah, I think that one of the coolest things probably right now that's on my radar is this AST grep. Playing with this, it really lets you kind of get familiar with it in such a way where you're not really writing AST, you're not knowing what node is what, but you can put in these substitutions and say I want to look for everywhere in my code where I do a check to see if something is truthy, and then I call it specifically. And and I want to replace that, with a check like this. So this is the shorthand for that, where you can just do the question mark dot. If it exists, it'll call it. Otherwise, it'll do nothing. Really cool. And this is kind of the idea that I had when I was kind of separating things out into different classes and things. I was like, how can I make this more approachable? Because the TypeScript, like the Node API, the Nodes API for the AST is very dense. And it would be really nice to have more of like a domain specific language that lets you more easily locate and manipulate the nodes that you want to manipulate. And this really seems to do a good job with that. So this is something I'm going to be looking at a lot more going forward for quick scripts, because that's the other thing, is these are all very like manual scripts that I've been writing, and they are very reproducible and usable. But if I can do it in a single command line, then I would very much like to do that.
Nice, thank you. It's interesting, and I'll take some notes. I also saw that you shared the link to the slides or the presentation.
Yeah.
If you give me the link in the private chat, I can also share it, and of course check Nick Twitter account in the description. So yes, thank you. Very interesting, and like many information, let's say, in one single talk. Do you agree?
Yes, it's a little bit dense, and I apologize for that. But
no, it was not meant to be a critic. Maybe I
no.
need to watch it again. Luckily, I usually I watch the live stream again, because I need to add timestamps, and so usually I check it out twice. So probably if you just came, it's worth to watch it again. But it was really intense, I will say. Great way also to end my day, my work day. What's the time there?
12:30 lunchtime.
Okay. No, I'm done. It's 6:30 p.m. here, so I'm absolutely done. Thank you so much for coming, and I would like just to give a reminder that we are doing this on a monthly basis. This is an event 100% free, offered by daily.dev. So you can just check it out. It's an absolutely free product. You can try and see if you get interested into it. We have an extension. You can use it from the web. So there are many different ways you can use it. We have been doing this for a while. So next month it will be 40 episodes, 40 monthly episodes. So it's like but we've been very consistent, and we've been doing this for a while, and what we see that people are really enjoying it. Thank you, Nick. It was really a great presentation. We share the link of the presentation. The links of Nick are in the description. Nick, one more question just for me is like, when is your next talk? I see that you're very active on this. Do you have a date for the next talk?
I'm actually presenting more in depth on this at KCDC, Kansas City Developer Conference, in June, at the end of June. So looking forward to that.
Okay. So you still have some time.
Yes.
And yes, that's it. The last thing is that the next month, so after I'll be back from Japan, we have a space when we'll talk about JavaScript frameworks, and again we'll have this let's say more funny style. So we'll make the frameworks fight. So if you want to join, also feel free to do it. I'll be glad with that. Last space, as I said, it was what is the best programming language. It has been the funniest space I've ever hosted, because we had like a representative. So we had some fun, because in spaces you can see you can't even share your screen. So at least we had some punchline from some of the speakers. So it might be fun. But next one, I don't know if this will be fun or absolutely crazy, because JavaScript frameworks, this can be even worse. So we are doubling down on this. But thank you so much. Now I know more about the TypeScript compiler API. I didn't know that it was so, I would say, well structured. So yes, thank you so much for sharing these slides. And I saw some repositories on GitHub. So there is much like there is enough, even to create a lot of content out of it. And also, I think I don't know if you agree with this, that like if we have some extra time, dedicating this to understand like how things work under the hood can really help so much, instead of staying just on the surface. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of other ways that having that knowledge can really benefit you, all the way from the things that I showed, the code mods, all the way to extending the way that your API, your IDE interprets the data it's getting back from TypeScript. So there's a lot of really cool custom things that you can do, and custom things for your project that you can do.
Thank you so much, Nick. As I said, we are done for today. Thanks again for your presentation and all the resources that you shared. The project. So now it's up to you. We shared a lot of links, a lot of things. I'll check it again, and yes, we are done for today. Bye, everyone, and see you next month. We already have the episode for April, so check it out on this YouTube channel. That's it. Okay. Bye, everyone. And of course, check Daily Dev. Bye-bye, everyone.